Welcome back to Her Side of Campus, the show where ideas spark action and voices ignite change. I'm your host, Komal Iqbal, and today we're diving deep into a conversation that just might change the way you see the world. Our guest isn't just making waves, they're creating tides of change, reshaping the landscape for women everywhere. Please welcome Rose Stephenson from Happy.
Hi.
Hi, Rose. Would you like to give us a bit of a background of what you do?
Yeah, sure. My name's Rose Stephenson. I'm the Director of Policy and Strategy at HEPI, and HEPI is the Higher Education Policy Institute. So we're a think tank, which means we do political research, and we do that on everything to do with higher education. So everything to do with universities and other higher level bits of education and training. So we try to act as a bridge between the university sector, the higher education sector, and the government. And we produce reports, one of which we're going to talk about today, but we also do a bunch of events and media work as well.
Brilliant. And before we discuss the report, which we'll get to, could you give us, in your own words, a brief summary of what motivated you to write this report in the first place and what you want to achieve with this research?
Yeah, so actually, it was inspired really by an intern that we had called Famke, who worked with us last year. And she wrote a really interesting report about the gender awarding gap at Oxford and Cambridge. So, generally speaking, in higher education, women do better than men. There's more women that go to university, and you're more likely to get a good degree as a woman than a bloke. Apart from first class degrees at Oxford and Cambridge, where that's flipped and men do better. So she wrote this really interesting report about that. And she just put in one sentence, which was along the lines of if all of your assessment is stacked to 1 week at the end of your degree, just a whole series of exams up 1 week after 3 years, it's possible that menstrual cycles and periods are having an impact on female students. And the press really picked up on this. And actually, there was an editorial written in the Times, I think, which was really stinking. And it said that Famke's work was reductive and a real feminist would chew her up and spit her out, et cetera, et cetera. And this is, a 20-something-year-old intern that this editor is writing about. And Famke completely took it in her stride. She was brilliant and she wrote a blog arguing against that. But that made us think, well, where is the data on this? Is this really an issue in education? And the data just doesn't exist in higher education. It's starting to get better lower down in the education system, and there's been some great work published recently. But it's women's health. People feel uncomfortable talking about it. And actually, we had academic researchers tell us they can't get funding to do this work because it's considered, and I quote, niche. I'm not sure that it could be niche when it's something that happens to 52% of the population for most of their adult lives.
Menstruation is niche.
Yeah, it's niche. Do you know, it's amazing. So this report's actually just won an award in the think tank world, which is really, really cool. But it won an award for being the most niche report from this year. So I did rename it as the most taboo report. So it's not niche, but it is really, really under-researched. And actually that makes it kind of niche in the research in the think tank world. But it's just taboo, and taboo is a big topic that we'll probably talk about today. So yeah, just really wanted to raise awareness. We wanted to find out if Famke was right, and it turned out she was. Real feminists love data. So I think it has really opened some eyes about what students are going through. And I've certainly had kind of loads of follow-up emails from either students themselves or really interesting kind of colleagues who are dads or were dads of students who were really struggling with their degree because of their menstrual cycle or periods. And, saying to me kind of 10, 20 years later, oh, my daughter really struggled with some exams and she feels like she didn't do as well and it's really under-recognised. So it's definitely an issue and it's really good to talk about it.
Definitely. I was also going to just mention in there really quickly, have you seen the news recently about Spain implementing a menstrual holiday?
Yeah, I think I saw that. And so you can have more kind of annual leave for your menstrual cycle or a sick leave for your menstrual cycle.
Yeah, I think that's a really good initiative, and I think more people need to adopt that.
Yeah, and I think, something that we found is people would often say, I've got a headache. or I just don't feel well, instead of saying, actually, I've got my period today and I'm really unwell.
Yeah.
So, hopefully with this work they're doing in Spain, it will normalize that you can say, God, I feel absolutely awful today because I've just started my period. I need to go home. Obviously that's not for all people who menstruate. Some people can just crack on, but for the people who do, being able to be upfront about what's happening, I think will be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just a really interesting take that Spain has taken, and maybe they're setting the standard for everybody. But back to the report. So yeah, it explores how menstrual cycles and symptoms affect academic engagement, attendance, well-being, and institutional policy responses. One of the statistics that I found very interesting was that only around 33% of students say that their school or college education about menstruation was good or very good, which is quite appalling to be honest, because it affects most like half of the population.
Yeah, and I actually used to be a science teacher at secondary school, and I can see why people don't think that this is great. So there's two kind of bits of the education system that deal with this. So if you do GCSE biology, there's literally a bit on the menstrual cycle where you learn about kind of the hormones that happen and how the hormones change over kind of a month-ish and what that means. But it's really biological. It's just like this hormone goes up and this hormone goes down, the end. Like that's what you need to know for your exam. And what the students told us was that this didn't tell them anything about how you would experience a menstrual cycle. So it didn't say this hormone goes up and therefore you feel really grumpy, or this hormone goes down and actually you're going to probably feel really exhausted for a few days and this is what you might do about it. So that's part one, is biology, and that's the thing that most people remember from school is the GCSE bit. There's also kind of the bit in relationships, sex and health education, which is actually massively improved in England. So the new guidance has just come out that's improved it. But you still need to have someone who's teaching that, who understands it well enough to talk about it. And I think there's much, much more information available about menstrual cycles now. Yeah, and social media can be really helpful for that. But that doesn't mean that, and I say this as a 40-year-old, that a 40 or 50 or 60-year-old teacher has had that really good education themselves and feels comfortable talking about menstrual cycles and understands how it can really impact on people. So yeah, it's good to see the change in England that's coming in. One thing I will say on education is that still now, 2025, schools still will separate boys and girls to teach about the menstrual cycle. Less so in GCSE biology because it's part of the curriculum, but in relationship and sex education. And it really came through in the report how adult students feel less comfortable talking to men, so male lecturers or coaches, and they said, we were taught at school by that separation happening that you can't talk to this about boys, and boys are told like, oh, this is this big secret that you can't possibly know about that happens to women. You have to go to a different classroom. Like you can't know about this. It's so damaging to do that separation. And I'm all for female spaces, etc., etc. But honestly, when we are teaching about the menstrual cycle, everybody needs to know about it, and boys and girls can talk about it together, and that will really help to break down some taboo.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I was doing like sex education, it was all of the girls in one class and then all the boys in the other. And I was like, why are they separating us? Because like it's just periods.
Yeah.
But I think I've always had that mentality of like, so what? It's just a period. Like, why can't we talk about it with the men?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
never like it's never it's never been like something that I've understood.
I think it's becoming slightly less taboo, but it's really interesting how powerful that taboo is. I think people, particularly younger people talking to their friends, it's much less taboo now than it was. But again, when you see who people will talk to, they're much more likely to talk to their female friends than their male friends,
Yeah.
etc., etc. But particularly if you go outside of that, if you think about doctors or university lecturers, etc., people tend to be more comfortable talking to women. And I'm just going to tell you a funny anecdote from when I was at university, which admittedly was a long time ago. But I had a friend, he was a fourth year medical student, and he thought by year 4 that women only bled on their periods when they went to the loo, which was quite problematic for somebody who was going to become a doctor. Now, I don't blame him because nobody had ever talked to him about it. But imagine if a woman came into hospital who was having really heavy menstrual bleeding, he would,
Oh
if he'd
my
not
God.
figured this out, he would have thought something was really seriously
Oh my
wrong.
God.
Yeah. And it's, I think just this deep understanding and being able to talk about it, being able to be taught at school, that your
Yeah.
friends would talk to you about it, that your sister might talk to you about it, breaking down that taboo is just the most important thing.
Yes, definitely. I was also going to add in there, like when we did have, for example, in my experience with sex ed, it was just periods. It wasn't like it was about like, being able to use a pad and using like hot water bottles, but there wasn't that area of, oh, some people might not get period on a regular basis, or there's these t sort of conditions that could affect you. So maybe go to the doctor if it continues to happen, because I have horrible periods.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, like, I think I've probably got PCOS. It's like all
Mm.
over the place. But if I had known that I could just go to the doctor and see what I can do, maybe then I wouldn't have been as uncomfortable going to the doctor in the first
Yeah.
place, even though all they did was give me birth control. That's another thing. That's
Yeah.
just like a whole
Yeah.
different topic. But I think I think schools should talk about also like the conditions that could happen if your periods are not regular, or your hormones are like imbalanced, and what you can do, like what are healthy foods in reality, because teenagers don't know that.
Yeah, and this came out really strongly again. Students wanting to know, wish they'd been told at school what constitutes normal and what constitutes, something that might actually need to be looked at by a doctor. Again, that's gone into the English curriculum, which is great. But again, you need someone who's, poor Mr. Andrews from geography, who's got to teach relationships and sex education and has got to talk about heavy menstrual bleeding with pupils, him,
Mm.
what training is he being given to get him comfortable with this conversation? And I think the other thing you said is you were just taught about periods, and I think that's quite common. There's four. It depends how you explain it, but there's four phases to the menstrual cycle, and the period part is just one of them. And the other
Yeah.
phases can be quite powerful. There's actually loads of really good information that's developed through sports science now in terms of understanding, if you do weight training, when might you lift heavy and when might you lift lighter, and etc. etc. And that really needs developing, particularly in terms of education. Is there a really good time of the month for you that you're just going to be totally on fire and you should write your assessments at that point? But that kind of understanding that whole cycle, I think that education is coming, but it's still, in terms of schools, it's really hit and miss as to whether you're getting that big picture.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I was also going to say the report, it also discusses how cultural taboos, historical framing, and language around menstruation also contribute to the invisibility of its academic impact. So, would you be able to tell us more about like your findings on this and what recommendations that you made in your report?
So there was kind of two types of taboo, really. So one was just talking about menstruation. Not everyone is comfortable with it. I've had a lot of conversations about menstruation in the last couple of years, and not everyone is comfortable talking about it. But the more we talk about it, the better. I think, honestly, particularly with men who've never had a chance, perhaps, to ask some questions or to find out a bit more. So number one is just like periods is taboo. The second taboo, which goes back to, I think, what Famke experienced, the intern that I was talking about, and how she was treated in the media, is there's this real taboo about women and people who menstruate being able to say, this is difficult. My life is harder because I have a period once a month. My life is harder because I menstruate. And I can understand why, women have spent decades, if not centuries, battling against the idea that menstruating makes us weak and hysterical and all the rest of it.
Mm.
But that's created this situation where it's almost seen as going against the sisterhood to say, oh, do you know what? There is one day a month that I actually can't physically go to work. And that, again, that is not all women, that is not all people who menstruate, but for some women, that is if you're throwing up because your period's so heavy, you can't go to work.
Yeah.
But admitting that, I think can feel like letting down feminism. And actually what that is leading to, and there's some really good examples in the report of students who are in an exam who start their period, who don't feel that they can ask to go to the loo and just get a pad and sort themselves out. A student who was doing veterinary medicine, she was in a field and needed to go to a service station, she needed to be able to say, I've just had my period, because someone just drive me to a service station. And again, women feeling able to go to the doctor and say, look, I'm just absolutely convinced that something is wrong here. And often you're having to have that conversation multiple times to get someone to take you seriously. All of that is quite taboo, because you're having to ask for an accommodation as someone who has period or menstruates, and that is seen as weak, and we shouldn't admit that. And I think that's really problematic in terms of getting medical help, but also just working your job or your education around what you're experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, I never thought about it in that sort of sense, especially like when you think of back like 50 years, it was completely different, and now it feels like we're kind of going back into that, and that's what we need to prevent, don't we?
Yeah, and I do think, we are seeing the erosion of women's rights around the world, and I think that's quite a scary place. So places like Spain, who are being really brave and putting this into legislation, it's great to see, but it does worry me as well. Can this then be weaponized against women? I'm not going to employ you because, you're going to take a week off every month, etc., which we know probably isn't true. But yeah, it's maybe a scary place to be, to have some of these conversations at the moment.
Definitely. So, with your report, I wanted to ask you what surprised you the most when you saw like some of the figures that you mentioned in the report? And do you think many students feel comfortable reporting or admitting those absences sometimes?
I think probably the figure that surprised me the most was how much education women and people who menstruate are missing. So on average, a student who menstruates will miss 10 days of their education a year, which is, that's 2 full weeks of teaching. And if you put that across a 3-year degree, that's 6 weeks of your degree that you're missing out on just because you menstruate. And we also asked students if they had a medical diagnosis, so something like endometriosis, adenomyosis, and these really kind of awful conditions. And that rose for those students to 19 days a year, which is 11 weeks of a 3-year degree. So you're basically missing an entire term out of a 3-year degree if you've got one of these medical conditions, which is massive. We didn't look at student outcomes based on this. It was beyond the scope of the report, but an academic colleague, Dr. Gemma Sharp, has just published, I think she might be Professor Gemma Sharp now. She just published a report looking at school outcomes at GCSE based on if you experience heavy menstrual bleeding, for example. And it does have an academic impact on your results for those students. It's quite early days research and more needs to be done. But you can imagine if you're missing a whole term of your degree, that's going to have an impact on your outcomes. So again, it's about being able to talk about that. It's about the university recognizing that this is a genuine issue and putting things in place. So, things have really changed in universities. We have much better lecture recording, for example.
Yeah.
Some universities are excellent at kind of flexible assessments. Some universities are not. So, but it's about kind of building that consistency. And again, the willingness to talk about this for what it is will be really important to breaking down some of these barriers to education.
Yeah, definitely. And when I was having a look at the report, which I will also link in the description of this podcast, in the report you mentioned that 1 in 6 students that you guys surveyed have experienced period poverty, and nearly half of them missed classes because of it. Could you talk to us a bit more about that data and the lived impact, and also how it intersects with socio-economic inequalities?
Sure. I don't think I was surprised that so many students were facing period poverty that they couldn't afford to buy products. But what I was surprised about was that they were missing classes as a result. So I know that lots of institutions have free period products, but either students weren't aware of this or they weren't able to access them. And the students that we interviewed talked about, some institutions were brilliant. Every bathroom you went into had a selection of products, and particularly in Scotland, where it's the law that they have to do this, and you could just access anything you needed at any point. Happy days. Other institutions, you were maybe having to walk all the way across campus and go to a particular office and then ask somebody for period products, which students just felt wasn't as accessible. You don't have to walk across campus and ask somebody for some toilet roll. It's just there.
It should just be there as well.
It's not that difficult. And I appreciate universities are financially stretched at the minute, but if you're talking again about, your poorest students, and particularly your students from care experience backgrounds, missing out on their education, because they don't have period products, I'm sure we could be a little bit more advanced about what we make available to our students.
Yeah, I was gonna say like we have a drawer in our students' union for period products that we keep stocked every day, all the time is there and it's available, and we've made it into like a donation station so people can put their period products in there as well, so that then it's like a give and a receive kind of thing. But I'm trying to implement that across the whole of campus because it's so worthwhile having, and so many more people on campus will feel so much more comfortable just to go and pick up a pad from the drawer, and then like they don't have to go all the way to the students union across campus just to get a pad. So that is something that we have been trying to push with the university for quite a while now, so hopefully we do something about that because yeah, like you said, we need to be more advanced, and it's just a few pads and some tampons. It's not going to hurt anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I'd encourage getting your estates team on board who do all the work in the university bathrooms, but also definitely use this report, to convince your university why this is a real issue and why they should definitely act on it.
Yes, definitely. I was also very surprised to see that only 15% of universities have any like menstruation related policies, and none of them seem to fully address what the students need. Even from like I was saying about the students union, we do have some of the measures in place, but that's why I'm working even harder to get those measures across the entire campus, especially with Freedom for Girls. So hopefully we get some more done about that. From your research, what are the biggest barriers to the universities adopting these types of policies, do you think?
So I think, first of all, it's never been flagged as an issue. Like I said, this research literally didn't exist until we published this report about higher education. So hopefully this will help to move things on. I was also really surprised that no university had a menstruation policy that dealt with students. What we did see was there's quite a few universities who have a policy around menopause for their staff.
Mm-hmm.
And my theory on that, and this is it not backed by evidence particularly, but I think it's an interesting theory, is that you now have, in the higher education sector, many brilliant women in senior positions, and but they get into that senior position as anybody would later in their career. Perhaps they're experiencing menopause and they can get it on the agenda. And I think that's probably step one. And step two is probably kind of working towards then, okay, so we're getting better policies around menopause. How can we then advance that into menstruation, throughout people's careers? I don't think you necessarily need menstruation policy if everything is dealt with anyway. But a policy can be a really helpful way to get all of those things done. So your free products, how you're going to handle assessments and extensions, etc. So yeah, for a student activist point of view, policies can be very powerful.
Definitely. That's definitely something that I'm going to be looking into now that you mentioned it. So I was also going to say another thing about your report was the fact that it discusses the taboo and the language around menstruation. For example, people avoiding saying that they're on their period and instead they say that they have a stomachache or a headache. How much do you think that culture, stigma, and language shape not just students' experiences, but also institutional attitudes towards those?
Again, it's that kind of hidden experience. So if a student is saying that they're missing lectures because of a headache, then their lecturers would just never know that actually maybe they've got a long-term health condition. If students aren't even saying to each other that that's why they're missing their course, it becomes an expectation that you just get on with it. And we heard this from students saying, I'm so ill on day 1 and 2 of my period, but everybody else just gets on with it, so I feel like I should. There's a kind of this comparison between other people. But if nobody is admitting and nobody's saying that actually the reason they're not there is their period or PMDD, which is quite a debilitating version of kind of premenstrual syndrome, then nobody knows. So again, we're taught this taboo at school, and we're taught this taboo maybe by our parents or whoever teaches us about periods and menstruation.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And it really impacts. It's really long lasting because there's no challenge. There's never a challenge to that taboo. So it just perpetuates.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, even as I come from an South Asian background, we period is not even a word that existed in my house until I was like, you know what? If my mom had me, this was my conversation to my dad. I was like, if my mom had me and also cannot like fast during Ramadan, why do I have to pretend to fast?
Mm,
And he just did he had no words. And that's
mm,
what made it all the more like ridiculous, is that he had nothing to say, because I'm
yeah,
like, oh, how do you expect us to be women and not have periods, or not need to pray, or not need to like fast? How does that even work in your brain? Like sometimes I think to
yeah,
myself, how do men not know like the simplest thing? Like periods is one of the most simple things on the planet to understand,
yeah. But
and
I
it's
think
the only
we
reason
have
that
to
everybody
acknowledge
is
that,
alive.
yeah, that men haven't had this education. There's so many generations of men who were literally excluded from this education, and
Hmm.
we as women don't talk to men as much, etc., etc. And there's a brilliant website that I point to in the report. I think it's a Welsh website that is about education about periods. And you know, as if someone is a dad of a young kid or a lecturer who maybe knows that some of their students are struggling but doesn't really understand because again they were excluded from this education. And it must be really embarrassing to admit that you don't really know very much about periods, this really biological
Exactly.
everyday process.
And
So yeah,
imagine like I
sorry,
was
go
gonna
on.
say, imagine you also have kids as well. Like
I know, right?
you made those kids. How do you
Yeah.
expect to have children and not know that your wife has periods? I don't get it. It's
Yeah,
just
but because it's taboo and it's
yeah.
particularly taboo to talk to men about it, and in some cultures more than others,
Hmm.
then yeah, you know, why would you be able to talk about it? You never
Yeah.
had a chance to ask a question or have that conversation.
Honestly, the only reason that I can walk around and not think about somebody telling me, "Oh, you're not fasting today," is because I was like, I'm not gonna pretend to fast. Like I said it to my mom as well. I was like, I'm not waking up in the middle of the night just to eat and then go back to sleep and then wake up and eat again because I'm not actually fasting, and then
Mm.
hide the fact that I'm eating in front of my dad. Like that's too much, to even too much brain power for somebody who's on their period, first of
Yeah.
all. And I'm just like, no, thank you. I don't want my sleep to be disturbed because I'm not actually even fasting. So I was like, that's it. I'm done. And then that's why now, like my younger siblings, they can do the same.
Mm.
And now, like nobody will bat an eye. But it's only because like I did something about it.
And do you think that that taboo is quite common that people are
Oh
pretending to
yeah.
fast so they don't have to say, actually, I can't fast today because I'm on my period?
Yes, definitely. The
It's really
amount of
interesting.
women that I have seen that will just be like, oh, yeah, I'm fasting. And I was like, I thought you were on your period. Just say it. Just say I'm not. Like nobody's gonna judge you. Nobody's gonna say anything. And like you have a period.
And that sounds like a great opportunity to break down that taboo because it's
Hmm.
your choices that you're making that day are based on whether you're on your period or not.
Hmm.
So yeah, it sounds like a good opportunity to start a conversation. And again, some
But
people will be super uncomfortable about it, and that's okay.
yeah. This is why we have this. What we need more of. So, given what your research shows, what would you say to students who are struggling with menstrual symptoms but they're afraid to speak up? What like immediate support or advice should they look out for?
So, first of all, it's not just you. This is a really common experience, and you just don't hear about it or see it. So, I would really encourage people to speak up if they can, because not only will you be more likely to get the help you need, even if the person you talk to is uncomfortable about it, but it's also taking all those steps to break down that taboo. And, you know, it's already changed as a society. You didn't used to be able to say menopause. People used to say the
Mm.
change of life in a quiet voice, you know, and now menopause is a really mainstream discussion. You know, it's in the news. You know, there's telly programs and podcasts about it, and I think that that is certainly happening for menstruation as well. But the more we talk about it, the faster that taboo will get broken down. I would also say if you need help and it's not forthcoming, don't stop. Like if you need
Yeah.
help, if you have to go to more than one doctor, which you probably will, if you have to go more than one time to your GP, just keep going until you get what you need because you do often, unfortunately, have to be quite persistent about getting that help. And if that's for your education, you know, find out how you can get support at your university. Something we found out with the policies was that health issues are mentioned. So let's say you can request an extension because you've got a health problem.
Mhm.
But menstruation often isn't, if you don't have a specific health condition, it's often not thought of as a health problem, even though it can make people feel quite unwell. But when we dug into it, people said, "Oh yeah, well that would include menstruation. We would deal with it on a case by case basis." But I actually think think these policies need to be more explicit
Yeah.
about the fact that they would cover menstruation. But again, I think for students, just be just be as upfront about it as you can. And if you don't get the answer you want the first time, have another go.
Yeah. Definitely. Standing up for yourself is like one of the best things that you can do for yourself. And I was just thinking about looking ahead. How do you hope this research changes the experience for the next generation of women entering higher education?
So I really hope that lots of, we call them academic registrars, so the people who are in charge of all the academic policies, I really hope they've read this work and will think about how assessments are set up, what flexibility there is around them, how explicit they're being in their information to students about the fact that menstruation would be considered as maybe a mitigating factor or a reason for an extension. And I would like to see period products everywhere, every
Hell
bathroom.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Constantly available, whether that's because you can't afford it or because you've just forgotten to bring something with you today and you started your period unexpectedly. Like your choice is either to go to the shop across campus or to go home, or you could just pop to the bathroom, grab something, go back to your lecture, job done.
Mhm.
This I really don't think anyone should be missing their education because they get periods.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just no longer acceptable.
Yeah. And maybe we should start allowing hot water bottles in classes. But I think that's
Absolutely.
I think that's just my own opinion. Oh, how I would love to go into a lecture theatre and have a hot water bottle.
Has anyone told you that you can't do it?
Not really. It just feels wrong to.
Just
It's that, yeah, it's just
break that
that
taboo.
taboo.
Just get on with it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got my period. Need a hot water bottle.
Yeah. Get over it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, maybe I'll try it next time. What would an ideal university environment look like in the next 5 years when it comes to menstrual inclusion, do you think?
Oh wow. I mean, I wish we could solve this in 5 years, but I think, like I said, if you think about the generations of people who have been taught that this is taboo and the generations of people who haven't had a good education on this, I think that would be a real challenge. But yeah, I would love people to just, in the way that you can say in an office or a lecture or seminar, oh, I've got an awful headache, to just be able to say, oh, I've got awful period pains today.
Yeah.
Just to have that taboo broken down and people to be able to go and find a pad or say, I've got an exam tomorrow, but I know it's going to be day one of my period. Is there any way we can work around this? It's going to affect my educational outcomes. To be able
Mhm.
to have those upfront conversations and people be willing to hear that and do something about it would be amazing.
Definitely. So, some hypothetical question. If you had a direct line to vice chancellors or senior leadership teams in universities, what are the first three actions that you would urge them to take right now to reduce the hidden burden of menstruation?
Okay, so I'm actually going to have four four actions.
Go for
Obviously,
it.
one, products in all the bathrooms. If you have gender neutral toilets, put them in there as well. Secondly, assessments. How flexible are your assessments? Now, we're talking about this in the context of menstruation, but actually, we know students are working, a huge number of hours in part-time work outside of their studies. Lots of students have caring roles, etc., etc. Flexible assessment, I think, has got to be the way forward. London South Bank University have really interesting work on this, and they've said it's actually improved their outcomes for their students, and it hasn't been this massive burden that they thought it might be to have flexible assessments. Number three, for universities to fund and encourage research in this area, super under-researched. And again, academics told me they can't get funding because it's considered this niche topic, which
Yeah,
it's not.
it is
And
absolutely not. Yeah.
my fourth and final one is to break down the taboo. So to run a campaign on campus, like it's okay to talk about periods, it's okay to talk about
Yeah.
menstruation. Until you challenge the taboo that people have been taught, that taboo will always exist.
Yes, definitely. I did a campaign last week about fibroids and women's health, and we had quite a lot of numbers. We just need to increase it like dramatically because we got like a lot of good feedback, but there wasn't as much people to really feel like there was an impact made. But I do believe that there was definitely some impact made because the university just allowed us to do something like that. So
Yeah.
again, we just need to do more of that kind of campaigning and conferences and educational sort of sessions just to get people to know about it and talk about it in a public setting, because even that can make
Absolutely.
a difference.
The University of East London have an amazing program where they offer blood tests to all their female students to check their iron levels.
Ah,
They kind of have these pop-up blood test places because iron deficiency and anemia is a massive issue for women, often undetected, and it can have an impact on your educational outcomes because you're kind of struggling through life, feeling exhausted all the
yeah.
time. So they offer it to all their students. It's a huge program. It's amazing. But again, it just breaks down that taboo because they are on campus offering this, talking about periods, talking about iron deficiency, and just having a really open conversation. It's fantastic.
Definitely. Well, definitely. I've got a lot to think about now, haven't I?
You're going to be very busy.
Yeah. So your report also calls on governments and regulatory bodies to change guidance and legislation around free period access and policy language. Which of these recommendations do you see as most politically viable or doable in the next 2 to 5 years, do you think?
Okay, so I'd really like England to catch up with England and Wales to catch up with Scotland and Northern Ireland, who have it enshrined in law that nobody shouldn't be unable to afford period products. So it's the law that you should have access to free period products in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the rest of us aren't there yet.
I wish that
Yeah,
England had free education for university.
well, yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
It's it's difficult when there's very little public money to do all these things that we would like to do. But I think there is something that could be done and it would be relatively cheap, but it would have a massive outcome. And it was a number one recommendation of my report, is that the Department for Health would run a big campaign about it's okay to talk about periods. It's okay to talk about menstruation. That would just be so powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Oh my God, I would love to see something like that happen,
Yeah, me
especially
too.
in Bradford. Yeah. Also, I was thinking, how can student edu organizations and, for example, like societies and different individual students push for that change?
So I think student activists have already had a massive impact in this field. So kind of the free period products on campus have often come from SUs. They're often actually administrated by SUs, as it sounds like it is at your institution.
Yeah.
And there is so much change that happens in universities that originates in this student activist space. So I would just say decide what you want and then go for it. So I don't know if you have. So I used to work at the University of Bath, and their SU was really good. And it would set out each year what it called its top 10. So the 10 things that Students' Union wanted to work on that year, and that was delivered to the executive of the university, so the vice chancellor and all those people, and to the board, so the governing body of the university. And Bath University took that really seriously. Like they were waiting for the top 10, and then they would plan on how they would work on that with the SU for that year. And it was an amazing relationship, and it drove a lot of change. Now, sometimes, things are out of everybody's hands. It was a lot about buses. There's only so much you can do as a
Yeah.
university about private bus companies. But I think being clear about what it is you want, having a number of priorities that year that the university can work on with you, and pushing for that.
That's really interesting because as women's officer, I'm also part of the student council in the students' union. And so I think maybe we should try to implement that as well, like at our level, and then push it to get to like the university executive level, because that way you kind of have a goal for the year and then you can work on achieving those goals, and it kind of pushes you to do that, because at the end, like you'll have an end product that you feel very happy with. So I love the idea, and I think we should definitely implement that. What roles do grassroots efforts or campaigns like ours, for example, play in shifting awareness, policy, or culture?
Yeah, again, I think it can have a huge impact. So whether it's been on sexual harassment, which, all the work on sexual harassment that goes on in universities, which is now regulated for, started as student activism, a lot of the work around mental health, and again, period products. So really don't underestimate the power that you have as students, as the student voice, as sabbatical officers. And again, just working on a way that makes it kind of strategic and clear to the university what you're looking for that year.
Hmm.
I think there's so many pressures on you as sabbatical officers. There's probably 1,000 topics that you could pick up and run with. That can make it quite hard for the university to support you because it's kind of scattergun and there's lots of things and they're all coming in at different times. So having that approach of these are the 5 or the 10 or whatever, the 3 if you're a tiny institution like some are, things we'd really like to see happen this year. How can we work on this together? Is a helpful approach, I think, for both parties.
Nice. Yeah, can definitely feed that back. If you could deliver one simple, powerful message or piece of advice from your research to all students, university staff, policymakers, what would it be?
It's okay to talk about periods.
I love the simplicity of that. Yes. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Rose, for your insights, your research, and your work pushing this conversation forward. It's so important that we talk about it. Thank you so much, Rose, for your insights, your research, and your work pushing this conversation forward. For our listeners, if you're struggling, suffering silently, or want to be a part of change, let us know. Connect with our student groups and share this episode to make menstruation matter in higher education. And that is a wrap for today's episode. Remember, everybody has a role to play in shaping our society, and the journey does not stop here. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep on making a difference. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Her Side of Campus.